On the night of October 8th, 2006, 8 missing people were found in one apartment. 2 dead, 6 alive, and every single one of them had been a patient of the same surgeon. A surgeon who, legally, didn't exist anymore. His medical license had been revoked years earlier for malpractice so severe the board didn't even bother with a suspension. They erased him. So who was he? And how did he end up running a secret clinic out of a downtown apartment? I'm Detective Cassandra Maddox, and today I'm uncovering the double life of Dr. Philip Stevenson, a man who managed to hide behind a spotless reputation while his patients quietly disappeared. Philip grew up in an upper-class Texas family known for pouring money into cancer research. He was the quiet kid, the gifted one, the child everyone assumed would do something important. And he did, at least at first. He earned his medical degree in 1988, rose fast, and by the late 90s, he was considered one of the most promising physicians in the state. Patients loved him. Hospitals trusted him. His name carried weight. But in the summer of 2003, everything started to crack, and it began with one patient. Her name was Lauren Whitmore, a 34-year-old teacher who came in for a simple outpatient procedure, something Stevenson had done hundreds of times without issue. According to the official report, the surgery went fine. According to Lauren's family, it did not. She woke up hours later in severe pain, disoriented, and begging for help. Staff noticed she was unusually pale and drifting in and out of consciousness. Stevenson brushed off their concerns, insisting she was just reacting to the anesthesia. But she wasn't. By the time another doctor intervened, Lauren was in septic shock. Her surgical site showed signs of contamination, and her blood work revealed something far more disturbing. She'd been given nearly triple the standard dose of anesthesia, a level that could have easily killed her. When the hospital reviewed the chart, a second red flag appeared. Stevenson had altered her medication logs multiple times, claiming it was a clerical error. But the hospital board found that Lauren wasn't his first mistake. She was simply the first one who lived long enough to question him. That incident should have ended his career immediately. Instead, it only triggered a quiet internal inquiry, the kind hospitals prefer to keep out of the press. And while they debated whether to file a formal complaint, Stevenson continued practicing. 2 months after Lauren Whitmore survived her ordeal, another patient wasn't as lucky. His name was Daniel Rusk, a 52-year-old accountant who went in for a routine gallbladder removal. Nothing complicated, nothing risky. Exactly the kind of surgery Stevenson could perform in his sleep. At least that's what the hospital assumed. Daniel never made it off the operating table. The initial cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest brought on by unforeseen complications. But when the autopsy came back, the pathologist quietly flagged something odd. Daniel's heart had stopped, but not from the surgery. He'd been given an anesthetic combination that no licensed physician would ever use together. 2 medications, both strong on their own, documented in his chart as being administered within minutes of each other. A combination known to depress breathing to lethal levels. Stevenson claimed the chart was wrong. He said the nurse entered the doses incorrectly. He blamed equipment. He blamed Daniel's weak heart. But here's what bothered investigators. Stevenson insisted on handling Daniel's anesthesia himself, something he rarely did. The nurse assigned to the case reported that he'd asked her to step out during the prep phase, and surveillance logs showed Stevenson stayed in the OR alone with Daniel for nearly 15 minutes before surgery began, with no documented reason. None of it was enough to prove intentional harm, but it was enough to get the hospital administration uneasy. So uneasy They quietly paid Daniel's family a settlement and removed Stevenson from several scheduled surgeries. Still, no one reported him to the medical board. Not yet, because they didn't want a scandal. They didn't want the public questioning the safety of their surgeons. So they protected their reputation and left Stevenson free to keep practicing, and he did, for another full year, until the malpractice case that finally blew everything wide open. The case that finally destroyed Dr. Philip Stevenson's medical career happened in late 2004, and it involved a 19-year-old college student named Mia Harris. Mia came in for a routine low-risk procedure, the removal of a benign ovarian cyst. Stevenson personally promised her parents he'd treat her like family. He didn't. What the investigation later uncovered was so shocking the board initially thought the surgical report had to be a mistake. Firstly, Mia had only agreed to a cyst removal, nothing more. But when she woke up in recovery, she was told the procedure had been more complicated than expected. But what Stevenson had done was perform a full hysterectomy without consent. There were no signs of disease, no medical necessity or emergency. Just a decision he made, alone, while she was unconscious. When questioned, he claimed he was preventing future issues, but the pathology report proved there were none to prevent. Secondly, she woke up mid-surgery. Nurses reported hearing Mia choke out a sound, something between a gasp and a cry, while the procedure was still in progress. Stevenson lashed out at them, insisting they adjust the anesthesia and accusing them of overreacting. But the anesthesiologist later admitted Stevenson overrode his dosage calculations more than once. Thirdly, she coded twice. Mia went into cardiac arrest during the operation and again during recovery. Both times, Stevenson pushed staff aside and handled the resuscitation himself, aggressively, defensively, almost territorial. She survived, but barely. Soon after, her parents demanded answers, and the hospital gave them evasions. Stevenson gave them nothing, but the nurses did. They filed formal complaints describing what they'd seen, and those statements forced the hospital board to dig deeper. What they uncovered wasn't a single mistake. It was a pattern. Altered charts, unexplained drug increases, unauthorized decisions during surgery, and an obsession with correcting things that didn't need correcting. By early 2005, the medical board revoked Stevenson's license permanently. No probation, no appeals, just exile. Publicly, he disappeared. Privately, he didn't stop practicing, he just stopped doing it legally. And within a year, 8 missing people would be found in his apartment. Losing his license should have ended everything. Instead, it pushed Stevenson into a different kind of medicine, the kind done behind locked doors, without ethics boards, without oversight, and without anyone to tell him no. He moved to the city within months of being barred from practice, quietly. No forwarding address, no public record, just a 1-bedroom apartment on the 6th floor of a converted warehouse building downtown, perfect for someone who didn't want to be found. It was later discovered that he rebranded himself. He stopped using Dr. Stevenson. Instead, he introduced himself as Philip, a medical consultant, which is vague enough to sound legitimate without being a lie you can verify. To neighbors, he was forgettable. To his clients, he was a savior, offering procedures they either couldn't afford or didn't want to report. His patients came from 3 places: referrals from people who wanted treatments off the books, online forums where he posed as a retired specialist, former patients who still trusted him and had no idea he'd been banned. And he was careful. No walk-ins, no ads, no paper trail. Everyone came through a private phone number he kept changing every few months. He also transformed the apartment. The living room became an exam area. The bedroom became a surgical space. He bought equipment secondhand and only in pieces from multiple suppliers to avoid drawing attention. A neighbor once mentioned seeing him haul in a massage table and cases of LED photo lights. They had no idea what he was really doing upstairs. He targeted patients who lived alone. Ones were easy to isolate and trusted him too quickly. He began categorizing them, not medically, but psychologically. The ones he labeled transients, loners, or unstable made him feel safer. If anything went wrong, who would even notice? The tipping point came with a woman named Marissa Logan. She became his first disappearance. Marissa was 28, a freelance graphic designer with no close family and an apartment barely 2 blocks from his. She came to him for a simple procedure, a mole removal and biopsy she couldn't afford at a legitimate clinic. She was polite, anxious, and she trusted him almost immediately. Stevenson took note. She went under anesthesia normally, routine dosage, clean prep, nothing that would raise suspicion. But instead of stitching her, waking her, and sending her home like a doctor would, he kept her under. Hours passed. Neighbors later reported hearing a loud drag across the floor that night. Something heavy, something unsteady, followed by silence. When Marissa didn't show up to a client call the next morning, the client assumed she overslept. When she missed another, they assumed she flaked. When her rent went unpaid the next month, her landlord assumed she skipped town. No one looked for her. Not yet. And that success, that perfect disappearance, emboldened him. Months later came a neighbor who started watching him. Her name was Evelyn Price, an archivist for the city library system. She lived in the high-rise directly across from Stevenson's apartment. Same floor, perfect line of sight. Not that she was spying, not at first. Evelyn just had a habit of noticing things. She noted that Stevenson had visitors. At first she thought he was hosting friends late at night, but they never stayed long enough for that. They came alone. They left unsteady, bandaged, or escorted to the elevator with an arm under their shoulder. And sometimes, they didn't leave at all. She kept a mental tally. And when she realized she had seen a woman go in on a Wednesday night who never came out, not the next day, not the next week, she became suspicious. A week later, she saw him drag something heavy one night. Not trash, not furniture, something wrapped. She saw him tape plastic sheeting on the inside of his windows. She saw him flip the lights off and use a portable lamp instead, like he didn't want shadows showing through the blinds anymore. And every time she tried to convince herself she was imagining it, another visitor would walk in and never walk out. When Evelyn finally called the police, she told them everything she documented. Dates, times, descriptions, which direction people came from and whether they left, how long the lights stayed on. When the dispatcher asked what made her think something criminal was happening, she didn't hesitate. She said, "People go inside that man's apartment and they don't come out." It wasn't enough for a warrant, but it was enough to raise eyebrows. And that's where I came in. By the time I got to the address, the caller was still at her window, pointing at apartment 6B, 6th floor, curtains sealed shut, lights on at hours no reasonable man kept, a silhouette pacing like something in there was eating him alive. The tenant registered to 6B, a Philip Stenton. No online presence, no current employer, no red flags on paper, except one thing, his face. It only took one look at his driver's license photo to realize exactly who I was staring at. Dr. Philip Stevenson, the disgraced surgeon whose case I'd studied years earlier when I was still in training. The man who should have been nowhere near a scalpel, ever again. And suddenly, the silhouette in the window wasn't just a shadow. It was a ghost, still wreaking havoc in people's lives. Over the next few days, nothing happened. Then I saw her, A woman, mid-30s, carrying a medical folder against her chest like it was something precious. She hesitated at his door, knocked twice. He pulled her inside fast enough to raise every alarm in me. And that was it. No screaming, no struggle, no immediate sign of danger. Hours passed. She never came back out. I checked every camera angle the building had. She'd entered 6B, but hadn't exited. I crossed over to the apartment. I knocked, announced myself, and waited. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. But then I caught the faintest trace of something metallic and sour pushing through the door frame. In cases like Stevenson's, it's usually infection, not death. A wound that's gone bad. That smell alone was enough to act. I tried the handle. Unlocked. Strange. I stepped inside. No horror movie lighting, no dramatic reveal. Just a small, cramped apartment with every surface stripped bare, except for one corner, where a cheap surgical lamp was clamped to a bookshelf, its beam locked onto a folding table. And on that table was the woman I'd seen. She was unconscious, with an IV line taped to her arm with electrical tape, a half-done incision across her abdomen that looked nothing like a trained surgeon's work anymore, ragged, swollen, red, the kind of infection that blooms fast when someone's operating in an apartment. I called out. Silence. I checked her pulse. Weak, but there. She was alive. For now. I radioed for EMS and backup. And as I cleared the rest of the apartment, that's when I noticed something else. A second room with 3 bolt locks on the outside. I felt my hand shaking as I unbolted the first lock. Not fear, anticipation. Second lock. My pulse was hammering. Third lock. I hesitated, just long enough to feel that tiny voice whisper the one question every detective hates. What if you're already too late? I pushed the door open. At first I couldn't process what I was looking at. A single lamp on the floor cast this dull yellow light across the room, just enough to show outlines. The smell hit second, that thick, humid hospital rot stench of bodies kept too long without care. Sweat, blood, antiseptic, infection, all mixing in a way that told me these people had been suffering for days. And then they moved. 6 heads lifting in the dim light, eyes wide, blinking like they weren't sure if I was real or just the next nightmare coming through the door. But not everyone moved. 2 figures in the back didn't lift their heads. Their bodies were slumped against the wall, skin already losing color, medical tape hanging loose from their arms. One still had a surgical drape half covering her chest. The other lay on his side, eyes open, staring at nothing. My brain couldn't keep up with what my eyes were seeing. A man with sutures down his chest, still oozing. A woman whose bandages were wrapped so tight around her legs they'd started to turn blue. Another who looked like he hadn't had water in days. Lips cracked, skin paper thin. Someone curled in the corner, rocking, whispering the same phrase over and over. And then from behind me in the hallway, a faint metallic clatter. Someone moving. Stevenson hadn't left. I moved toward the doorway, gun raised. A metal tray suddenly slid across the tile, screeching as surgical tools rattled over the floor. Then Stevenson crawled out from beneath the sink, not walked, crawled. His gloves were still on, his scrubs streaked with blood, his pupils blown wide like he was answering voices only he could hear. He jerked upright with a violent twitch, unsteady but fixated, and his hand disappeared behind the counter. He stepped into the light with a scalpel glinting in his fist, and everything detonated at once. He lunged, the blade slicing past my vest as I slammed into him, knocking him into a table stacked with trays. Instruments clattered to the floor like scattered bones. He scrambled up, grabbing a pair of heavy surgical scissors, breathing in frantic bursts. Then he bolted, straight for the survivor's room. I chased him, boots sliding on metal and debris. He reached the doorway just as I caught him, slamming his wrist against the frame hard enough to make the scissors drop. He twisted free with wild strength and surged at me again. I fired once, and he went down. The moment I radioed in what I'd found, the quiet hallway erupted. Boots pounding up the stairwell. Officers shouting commands. EMS pushing past me with stretchers. They loaded the injured woman from the living room onto a stretcher, oxygen mask already on her face. I told myself she'd make it. I wasn't sure. Meanwhile, the evidence techs were taping off the bedroom, cameras flashing as they documented the 2 bodies on the floor. And just like that, the investigation stopped being a welfare check and became something else entirely, a crime scene with potential serial implications. Within an hour, the apartment was swarming. Homicide, the medical examiner, even the sergeant who never left his desk unless the world was ending. By nightfall, reporters were packed behind the police tape downstairs, barking questions at anyone in a badge. Every theory, every rumor, every ugly detail they could snatch from overheard radio chatter. They spun it into something bigger, louder, more monstrous. Interviews with families of missing persons flooded the news, people crying on camera, begging for answers, asking if their loved ones were among the unnamed victims in the Apartment of Horrors, as one network so helpfully labeled it before we'd even finished collecting evidence. And the worst part? Stevenson had been doing this for a while. The first punch to the gut landed when CSU pulled open the filing cabinet wedged behind the dining table. We expected paperwork, maybe fake charts, maybe notes. We did not expect what was inside. Each folder had a Polaroid clipped to the front, a photo of the patient the day they came to him. Some smiling, some nervous, some clearly unaware they were being photographed at all. Then came the post-procedure photos, taken on the floor, on the table. Some mid-operation, the kind no sane surgeon would ever document. The deeper we went, the worse it got. A drawer below it held teeth, human teeth, not neatly preserved, some cracked, some with dried tissue still attached. He'd labeled them like specimens. Then we found the cooler. A portable camping cooler shoved behind the couch, ice half melted with 3 jars inside. Not medical jars, reused food containers scrubbed clean. Each held something suspended in a clear liquid. Tissue, organ fragments. One looked unmistakably like a piece of a lung. By the time Stevenson was being wheeled out, cuffed, bleeding from the hip, still wearing that floaty, detached expression. I hadn't blinked in what felt like an hour. As the paramedics adjusted his restraints, he muttered something. "They weren't ready," he whispered. "Ready for what?" At midnight, CSU called me into the kitchen. They'd found a hidden compartment under the sink, a false bottom. Inside were syringes, custom-made restraints, and a handwritten list titled Next. 5 names, dates scheduled beside them. 3 of the dates were upcoming. And somewhere out there, at least 5 more people had no idea they were ever on his schedule. Over the next few days, we worked around the clock, interviewing survivors, cross-checking medical records, digging through every scrap of evidence from that apartment. The press called him a monster, a butcher, a madman. But the truth we uncovered was worse, because it wasn't madness, it was intent. When we finally sat him down, Stevenson didn't rant or ramble. He didn't deny anything. He spoke with the calm, clinical detachment of a man explaining a research project. According to him, he only chose patients who were already broken. He said his malpractice case, the one that cost him his license, wasn't a failure. It was the beginning. In his mind, he wasn't hurting people. He was correcting them, testing techniques he believed the medical board wasn't brave enough to allow. Every scarred body, every Polaroid, every neatly catalogued tray in that apartment, it all fed into this twisted belief that he was still practicing medicine. Just without oversight, without ethics, without limits. And when I asked him why he kept going even after 2 patients died, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Progress always has casualties." He truly thought he was still a doctor. Stevenson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and as the cell door slammed behind him, only one word crossed my mind: checkmate. If you're still here, you're one of the curious ones. Stick around. The next mystery's already waiting.